Welcome to Humanity Rising. I'm Tom Eddington. I'm filling in for Jim Garrison. He's away this week. Delighted to have you join us this week as we do a deep dive into the brilliant work of the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies. IACS is an independent neuroscience lab located in Santa Monica, California, that's been doing some really groundbreaking research using experiential technology to promote human flourishing. Delighted to have my good friend and colleague, Carson Kelly, joining us this entire week. Carson has put this week's program together. Many of our viewers have seen Carson on prior shows that the two of us have done together, and we're delighted to have the folks from IACS with us again this week. They've been with us on a couple of broadcasts. So good morning, Carson. Great to be with you today.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Thank you for once again, excuse me, facilitating our participation on this wonderful podcast. I appreciate it. And wanted to just take a moment and thank Jim Garrison as well and the larger team at Humanity Rising for our ability to bring forward some amazing people, colleagues and friends now and so forth, and highlight the work that they're doing in service of a more compassionate and flourishing world. And I thought maybe I'll just take a moment, Tom, and just introduce myself for those of folks that don't know me. My name is Carson Kelly, and I'm the founder of Compassion 2.0. Compassion 2.0 is a collection of professionals who are attempting to scale compassion through the intentional architecture of compassionate human experience that is both based on scientifically validated practices and interventions, and that also can be measured. We do this through the creation of compassionate and flourishing frameworks through both product development and organizational culture. Community consists of organizational developers and leaders, product developers, neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, doctors, UX, UI designers, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and more. And you can learn more about us at www.compassion2.com. And so to Tom's point, this week, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the brilliant work of the Institute for the Advanced Consciousness Studies, IACS for short. And it is, as Tom mentioned, an independent neuroscience lab founded by Dr. Nico Regente, who will be joining us later this week. And so with that, I'd like to bring on both Nanette Simonian and also Dr. Leonardo Christoph Moore to join us for our conversation today about day one, where we will take a look at the lab itself, kind of the overview, and then also specifically some work that Leo is doing. So if you guys could join us, that'd be great.
Hey,
nice to see you guys. Thanks for taking the time to be here. It's early in California, so I appreciate Nanette and Leo being able to get up and join us here for this conversation. Before we jump in, I wanted to just read something from the website from IACS, just giving a little bit of a presence as to the thinking behind it. Founded in 2019, the Institute for Advanced Consciousness Studies is a 501c3 research laboratory using immersive experiential technology, neuromodulation, neurofeedback, and altered states to study consciousness. Specifically, the aim is to precisely capture, model, and provide an at-will instantiation of discrete states of consciousness that beget positive behavioral outcomes. Current focus is on fostering meditative and entheogenic experiences. So that's a word salad. I'm wondering if Leo and or Nanette, if one of you would be willing to just take a moment and maybe translate that into language that I can understand.
Sure. So it's clear that transformative experiences and non-ordinary experiences are really important for human meaning making. They're also really important for mental health, historically speaking. However, they aren't in our contemporary society really accessible to most or all people for a number of reasons, right? There's all the sort of legal and cultural contraindications around psychedelics, the tremendous discipline and years of work required to achieve advanced meditative states, which is not to say that people are lazy or anything like that. It's just anything that takes that long means that it's not going to be accessible as accessible to large numbers of people, because there isn't really an infrastructure by which to facilitate people's entry into these disciplines. That's all. And, often people don't have time. Um, and given that, a lot of this was maybe provided by sort of the functions of religious communities, et cetera, and those have their own baggage as well. I mean, this is not falling on one side or another about it. It's just, again, not for everybody. So what this produces in the modern era, I think, is a large segment of people who are maybe too skeptical for religion. They might be too square for psychedelics. They might not have time to cultivate advanced meditation. And so what that ends up happening then is you have a bit of this, bit of a vacuum of a lack of these transformative experiences that are so important. And this has been shown over and over again in the clinical literature around the concept of self-transcendence. These experiences by which the boundaries of the ego dissolve, and one feels deeply connected to one's authentic self, as well as to the greater world and other people. It's often accompanied by feelings of compassion and a feeling that time slows down, and feelings of great joy. It tends to resituate people in the sense of large scale meaning. It makes it easier to plan for the future and think of oneself as part of a large project and structure, and not just sort of live with day-to-day concerns. It's what people might call transcendental experiences. And these types of experiences are frequently reported as life-changing, right? People can have them accidentally, right? Either through an aesthetic experience, like an experience at a concert, or being in nature, or when a major life event happens. However, again, if we're admitting that these are crucial experiences, not just for well-being, but for mental health, and for, importantly, a sense of meaning, because we think about mental health as this sort of day-to-day thing, but often it's not always thought of in the terms of the greater context of meaning making, and how important it is for humans to feel that they are part of a narrative that has meaning. And as we've all seen in the last few years, how easy people can fall into authoritarian or conspiratorial or consumerist, et cetera, narratives when there's a lack of a grand narrative, right? Or when the grand narrative is purely apocalyptic. Right. So we need these types of experiences to to ensure that we're sort of people who are invested in our communities, in our relationships, that we invest in long-term projects and don't just engage in short-term thinking. It's important for mental well-being day to day. It's important for our health, right? We don't maintain our own health, or even our organism doesn't maintain itself as well if we aren't structured in some kind of meaning-making structure. So there's a host of benefits, and the lack thereof is really dangerous and bad, increases suffering. And so if what we're saying then is that this is really important, it's necessary, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but that the ways we get there are either generally inaccessible to people because they take too long, or they're illegal, or there are cultural resistances and contraindications, or psychiatric ones, right? Psychedelics aren't for everyone. If you have a family tendency or a personal tendency towards like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, many of the serotonergic psychedelics in particular are probably contraindicated for you and should be taken with extreme caution, right? And you might be too skeptical for religion, et cetera. And then, so what's left, right, is either these so are we just supposed to rely on having these accidental experiences, life-changing experiences? And we would argue no. There was once in most societies an institutionalized mode by which to achieve these states periodically, either collectively or otherwise. And so part of the mission of the lab, to put it in more general terms, is we want to increase access to non-ordinary transformative experiences. And and part of doing that is we need to understand them better and why they work, right? Like even if you set aside the more philosophical or humanist or even spiritual aspect of this narrative, if you were just being a cut and dry materialist, um, it's extraordinarily interesting and compelling as an area of research how a complex system like the brain and body, that is by its nature homeostatic, right? It tries to resist perturbation. It tries to not transform. It tries to keep things more or less on track. Um, how it is that a single experience, frequently one that doesn't actually involve any external stimulation with a pharmacological substance, right? Something endogenously created at times can transform this complex system so profoundly that it can change how it functions for the rest of its existence, or at least for a very long time, right? Even from a purely physicalist perspective, a non-sentimental perspective, that's a really interesting problem. Um, and I would say there are many ways we're studying it. Like our lab is doing a lot of things, but generally speaking, I would say that's the focus of our research, is understanding and democratizing these palliative non-ordinary states. Yeah, I'd say that's a good summary.
That's a great summary. Thank you. Um, so many different places to go with that. As I hear what you're saying, then in my words, in a simple way to state it, the work that you're doing is work that helps humanity be more human in that
Yeah.
sense, and to be more present to our greater presence. If that, I don't know if that resonates with you, but it just seems like what the lab is doing is really pushing on all fronts when it comes to the experience of being human, and doing so in a way that can provide, using science, can provide ways in which to access maybe frames in which that people can't regularly access. Is that a fair statement? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us a little bit, just, getting back to some of the methods, and Nanette too, feel free to jump in on this as well. Nanette is the general manager or the lab manager for IACS. Leo, Dr. Christoph Moore, is a senior research scientist there, just in terms of some of their roles. So Nanette has an opportunity to be working with the actual mechanics of the lab as well. And I'm curious to know, just when I reread some of the language around experiential technology, neuromodulation, neurofeedback, et cetera, tell the audience just a little bit about, and Leo, maybe you could start. What are those things? What is neuromodulation, as an example? How does that practically, what does that practically mean?
It just means to modulate the brain
Mhm.
directly. So if you're speaking loosely, everything's neuromodulation. If I show you my hand, that's neuromodulation. But what it means generally in our field is to directly stimulate the brain, either with like transcranial magnetic stimulation, uses magnetic fields to induce electrical fields in the brain. And what we do at the lab is focused ultrasound, which uses beams of sound basically to mechanically, very, very, very slightly mechanically vibrate neurons, which can create membrane potentials. So you can also directly stimulate areas of the brain differently than you could just by, again, the normal channels.
So when you say normal channels, apologize. Maybe I just had a little brain skip there. What exactly does that mean? What do you mean by that?
The normal ways that one gets into the brain, right? Ears, nose, mouth,
Oh, I
eyes.
see. I see.
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So
Right through the skull. Yeah.
yeah, express trained. Got it. Okay, cool. And so neuromodulation. So then, how about, say, neurofeedback? What's the nuance and the difference between those two ideas?
Neurofeedback is, I mean, like biofeedback. It's uh you make you display internal, you give the person exteroceptive, that is external information regarding an internal process. And by having it be something external, it's frequently easier for the person to then manipulate their internal state, because we don't always have direct access, or at least intuitive direct access, or explicit direct access to our internal states. We experience them, but like I experience being calm or relaxed or agitated, but I don't experience directly, the alpha band in my EEG signal, or some like marker directly related to my state of arousal. I just experience the whole thing. So if you can record some pertinent variable of interest that's related to, for example, a calm or anxious state, or a calm, like an up or down state, for example, or any number of other aspects like emotion, etc. But the most simple example is that, like your level of physiological arousal. If I can record that, extract that feature, and then show it back to you, and just give you, say, for example, here's an arrow, and if you move when it moves up on the screen, you're more sort of anxious, or you're more physiologically aroused, and when it goes down, you're calmer. So I want you to try and just make the arrow move down on the screen. And there's something about that perception action loop where it's related to something specific. It gives you a bit more control over specific aspects of your function. Does that sound about right, Ninette? Did you add anything to
No.
that? Cool.
Cool. Thank you. That's helpful. I think it'll be helpful too for folks who are listening who might not have that, experience. Very cool. Are there any other kinds of things that you guys are working with in order to conduct the actual research itself, like say the LumaCube or any other tech?
Yeah. So we work with like these immersive environments. We do stuff in VR as well. But we find it's also good to have environments where the person knows they're actually there, like they don't have a thing covering their head. So we have this thing called the Lumina Mind Gym, or Infinity Cube. It's like a 10 by 10 cube that the person comes in. They're completely enclosed, and it's pretty spacious. It doesn't feel too closed. And then once the door is closed, because it has mirrored sides with little LEDs dotting it, you feel like you're suddenly in this boundless space full of stars.
Mm.
And inside there, we can precisely control those lights, even have them be tied to your own, your heart rate or your physiology or aspects of your brain data, so that you are reflected back at yourself in the environment. And we're exploring some of the ways that can help people, encourage people to feel a sense of the dissolving of the boundaries of self and dissolving of the ego, by actually almost tricking the brain, being like, look, yeah, you can see yourself out in the environment, therefore you're not discrete. You don't just end at the skin.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of our work is also, one of the ways we've found that you can create these self-transcendent experiences is through aesthetics, right? Which wouldn't have been a surprise a few hundred years ago, but I think so much of aesthetics has been associated with like just graphic design and commercialism, et cetera, that we forget that aesthetics come from trying to engender the sense of awe. Aesthetics and art began in religious and mystical contexts. And so and still to this day, the thing that we find can most reliably induce a self-transcendent state in someone is give them a song like Rufus Wainwright's Hallelujah, that creates a sense of aesthetic chills. When people feel chills, we found that that's very, very, very much like when people feel self-transcendent experiences through psychedelics or meditation. So yeah, we stimulate people in every kind of way. So directly tapping the brain, showing them things that are aesthetic, or making them listen to things. Yeah. And we even have some, we're even going to be having some work coming up where we actually stimulate parts of the body to help people get more in touch with their body. Yeah, but that's still coming up. Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you for taking us through all of that. So Nanette is the one that primarily is working with the subjects and the people in the lab who come in to participate in these studies. So Nanette, I wanted to turn it over to you a bit just to give us a sense, from the perspective as a lab manager, what's it like, as we discussed, to be to have a day in the life of IACS? What are the kinds of things would we see if we were little flies on the wall watching? How many different activities are happening in a given moment in time, in the sense of how many concurrent research studies are going on, and what does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So we have one main research space. So we generally run one study at a time during the day, but we do have multiple studies probably going on at the same time, 2 or 3. And so a lot of our studies for each participant normally takes around 2 to 3 hours. So we'll see maybe up to 3 people come in. And these studies, we collect, behavioral questionnaires from them. We have a whole setup portion where it takes us around 30 minutes to set up an EEG cap. Most of our studies collect brainwave data. And then we'll move on to the actual experimental portion, whether it's, again, an audiovisual experience. It's an hour of just our participants meditating, just capturing their brain data, or doing neuromodulation with ultrasound. So that takes most of our experiences are either 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or it'll range longer to like an hour, 2 hours. And then once they're done with that, they'll take more questionnaires. We really love questionnaires at the lab. And so normally it's myself running these people who've already been screened to make sure they qualify. We normally work with a lot of healthy participants. The niche group that we do work with has been experienced meditators. So that's been a little bit more difficult to recruit, but luckily we're located in Santa Monica. So we have a lot of meditators here, over 5 years of experience in Vipassana, who have like a regular practice. And so it's normally me and another research assistant, or we have UCLA interns coming in to help me out. And yeah, we get all types of interesting people come in, and I've run like an obscene amount of participants probably at the lab over the past 2 years. I might have like carpal tunnel syndrome soon from EEG caps. But yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Well, thank you. And one question just showed up in the chat. We'll just take a moment. Question from Kurt. How does one participate in a study? I could possibly participate as I live in San Fernando Valley. How do we connect?
Yeah, so on our website, we have all our different studies happening. And then on each page, if we're currently recruiting, there'll be a link that says sign up to be a participant. And that's like the main source, if you're interested, is through our website, which I can link in the chat. But also on our social media, we'll have stories, we'll have the links to sign up. Or if you join our newsletter, you'll get an email that says these are the current studies if you're interested. But yeah, majority of our studies have been in person. So if you're in the San Fernando Valley, you can definitely join.
And another question came in while you were talking. Is there any thing that can be done online?
I believe we've had a couple remote studies, like our first aesthetic chills study was online. But yeah, I don't know if we'll have more. Leo, do you have any information?
Yeah, no, we've run probably at this point run almost 5,000 subjects through online surveys, which we find is if you want to get the really fine-grained information like, EEG and neural data and, really deep information about each person, and you really need an on-site study. But in terms of just making sure that your stimuli are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and people are responding in a way that's, pleasing for them, or, getting fine-grained information about that, you can do a lot with online surveys, because you can just throw numbers at it. So we validated our whole database of aesthetic chills, which I think I might have a link here, but it's called the Chills DB, Chills database. And we'll provide a link to that in a second. But
Sure.
there you can see, over 40 videos and songs that have been shown to reliably induce aesthetic chills in a very, very diverse group of people. We make sure to balance our samples, not just, gender and ethnicity, et cetera, but we actually make sure to collect people from all around the political spectrum, because it's been found that frequently, aesthetic experience is very tied to bodily experience. And there seem to be a lot of intriguing differences at different parts of the political spectrum. More so extremes versus center, which is interesting, and not so much a left versus right thing in the participation of the body in decision making and cognition and stuff. So we've done some cool studies on looking at that in particular. We did a study sort of, for example, comparing a match sample in Texas versus California, and seeing how people's political orientation and how their approach to religion and spirituality interacted with the way their bodies became involved in their aesthetic experience, right? Like, what gave people chills and how strongly they felt them. And we are going to be probably following up with a number of studies. I'm personally interested in looking at also chills arising from negative experience, like horror chills and things like that. It hints at chills being possibly a marker of when a sort of a deep, let's not say a deep truth, let's say when a deep belief is touched on, right? So I don't think that just feeling chills is what makes people feel self-transcendence during these experiences. I think that listening to a song or listening to a speech or having an insight that reminds you of of your humanity, of your true self, of your connection with everything. The marker of that insight is chills. We feel the whole body responds when you have a deep insight. And I think it may be that similar for horror chills, when something reminds you of your vulnerability, of the fact that, and from some deep evolutionary perspective, we're never safe, that kind of thing. So when you're reminded of that, I think it's same. So we're learning more about what these bodily responses indicate about, the process of belief, et cetera. And yeah, one of the ways we do that are these in online surveys. So
That's great.
we should
So
have
there's
more
opportunity for people to engage ultimately as in the future, if
Yeah.
they're remote, not local to Santa Monica.
Yeah, you don't have to be local to participate at all. Yeah.
That's great.
Carson, I'd love to just jump in. Just, Leo, picking up on your comment about personal interest. I would love to hear from both of you. What is your personal interest? How did you get into this work, and where do you want to see it going? What personal questions are you trying to answer, or would love to know more about?
Nanette?
Sure. So I finished my undergrad in 2021 in cognitive science. And then shortly after, I started working here specifically for our audiovisual study. But then we started launching these meditation studies, which is what I was particularly interested in, and specifically the mind-body relationship. And so I got really involved in that. That's where I kind of picked up like more responsibility and kind of transitioned to a more junior research scientist role. And working here a couple years, I have very much enjoyed working with like the experiential technology, and would want to pursue graduate school, definitely incorporating neurotech in whatever lab I work at in the future. So I've narrowed down my interests from everything I've learned, and I want to pursue neuropsychology. So as much as I love neuroscience and the research being done here, I know it's a very unique situation, and that everything I've learned and the mentorship and the flexibility and independence that I've had over the couple years here would definitely have been different if I was working at a larger lab at like a university, let's say. So I know this is not what academia is normally like, which is, I know, a topic we're going to discuss like later in the podcast possibly, but that's why I want to pursue clinical psychology as well. I'm interested in also practicing as well as maintaining a foot in the research and academia world as well. So yeah, that's kind of summary on my goals.
And just picking up and for clarification, you referenced the mind body. When you say mind body, were you referring to the skull brain and the body, or how are you defining mind body in that context?
Yes, so the brain and then behavior. So let's say studying let's say XYZ. So something in the brain is, there's a correlation with let's say a health behavior, so that's a Z, and then diving into the Y and figuring out like the mechanism that kind of contributes to this relationship, and if it exists, and learning more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And Leo, how about you? How did you get into this work, and where, just as a human being, where would you love to see this go, and what questions would you like to see it answer?
Let's see. Well, I got into transformative experiences like as a scientist more recently, but I grew up in a very artistically oriented family in a very sort of in a very beautiful and artistically dense part of the world in Oaxaca in Mexico. So aesthetics were always a big part of my life, and the transformative aspect of aesthetics was always something very present. And I've always been very aesthetically oriented. I'm also a musician and a photographer, so I feel I hear and see and feel very deeply. I'm very engaged with the environment, and I've always I've always felt that aesthetic experience was a path to the spiritual, and um, but in terms of in terms of scientific interests, my interest started first with just trying to understand how people worked, and particularly like I got really interested in human morality as an undergrad. I got into a neuroscience sort of focus because I thought it would be the best way to understand how the mind worked, and I got really interested in sociopathy, actually, how there were these people who were not insane, but nonetheless inhabited a very different world than most of us, like where the suffering of others didn't really compel or move them, and that that people like this exist in every arena of the world. It's actually more common than we think, and not all of them are antisocial necessarily. It's this interesting kind of blindness, I guess. And I got really interested in how that worked, and how hence how the brain was involved in morality. Um, and that got me onto studying why basically to the opposite question, like why is anything altruistic? Why is altruism all over the natural world and humans? If we're just these like self-maximizing Darwinian genetic machines, right? Then why do we show so much altruistic mutualistic behavior? Why do so many animals sacrifice themselves for their kin? And even non-kin, right? And we do it all the time, much more than we get credit for. I think, like humans, you hear more about the bad things we do, but I don't think everyone unless you've lived through like a civil war or a really breakdown of society, or like when things really go bad, I don't think most people appreciate how much worse it can be. And actually, like every day, most people are doing these little parts to help keep things running and keep things working. And I think there are more hands on the wheel trying to make things not be horrible than we think. I think we actually do a pretty good job frequently, not always. And we have to keep that job up, right? But so anyway, I got really interested in prosociality and what drives people and what drives any organism to feel for the plight of others and to be motivated to even sacrifice themselves and undergo harm to help others. Um, and that led to a lot of work on the human mirror neuron system, which some of you may have heard of. It's just this system in the brain. It turns out to be, I think it's overall just a property of the brain generally, that our brain tends to simulate what others are experiencing, everything that they're experiencing. Like, we tend to simulate others all the time. And I think that process of simulation drives us, because I'm experiencing your pain vicariously and experiencing your joy vicariously. It drives me to, encourage, it drives me to want you to be happy and want you to experience less pain. I think we have a inborn kind of golden rule, most of us, actually. And maybe where a lot of the problem comes about is how we pursue that golden rule, right? I think a lot of bad things in the world happen from people trying to do what they think is the right thing. Um, but anyway, I got very interested in that, and then that, in the last few years led to trying to understand how can we produce experiences that radically or reorient people or remind them of the human condition and reorient them back towards being other oriented and being less selfish and less self obsessed. Because you should take care of yourself, but I think it's generally agreed upon that a purely self-focused life is not as happy a one as one that it has some focus and service towards others. There's more meaning in when you take responsibility for your presence in the world and try to be kind to others and foster relationships with them. And I think that's something that even psychopaths can learn, oddly enough. So so trying to have more of these experiences out there in the world might, just flip a few extra switches so we don't get, the right person doesn't take the wrong decision and lead us to a huge war or anything like that. Um, so that's what led me to the work on prosociality, which we're now implementing in AI systems. We're actually trying to, we're about to embark on a 2 to, maybe the rest of our life project on how do we teach artificial agents that are, possibly going to be very, very intelligent, more intelligent than us in certain ways. How do we teach them to arrive at the same conclusion, the same appreciation for kindness, and the same regard for the suffering of others? How do we make sort of Buddhist robots, basically? So that's part of the work, right? So transformative experiences, prosociality. And then in terms of what I'd like to study in the future, I mean, I just basically in the last couple years got into this arena of AI safety, how to make AI safer and kinder, etc. So I'm excited for that. It's going to be challenging because I'm a neuroscientist. I'm really coming at it from the biological perspective and interfacing with the help of some, very patient computer scientists and learning how to talk to them and, you know, learning how to explain to them my insights about how biological systems work, but then also learning more about inspirations they've taken from how the brain works to build their own systems. And that back and forth has been really rewarding. And um, I'd say another big thing that I want to study and explore over the next couple years as Carson knows, we're developing a lot of work on trust and really thinking about trust rigorously in a way that you can talk about it happening in collectives at the level of like corporations and societies, as well as individuals and even systems within individuals, like trust between your organs and not in a metaphorical way, like really doing this in a rigorous fashion. So we want to kind of revolutionize the study of trust, um, and how to foster trust. We're going to be doing a lot of work. You mentioned mind body. We're doing theoretical work that we want to turn into real work, like empirical work on studying the phenomenon of placebo, or more broadly, how do beliefs become translated into bodily function? Because it's really clear they do. We have loads of data on that, if you can change your beliefs or change your beliefs about how your body works, you can actually change how your body works. And there's loads of data on this. There's loads of forms of therapy that are increasingly applying somatic-based methods, and in psychotherapy and in medicine. What there is still, in my view, a lack of are, good, sparse, like parsimonious, elegant models to really explain this. So theoretical models to really explain how does belief become enacted in bodily function. So that's something we want to do. We want to work on and work with people in pain, in pain clinics, etc. And actually look at how does a structured belief translate into bodily function. So those are the things I'm most interested in now. But there's so much going on.
There's a lot to explore.
Yeah, the last point you were making reminds me of Bruce Lipton and his research and work on epigenetics. I mean, you're speaking his languge.
Oh, great. Oh, I just saw
Have you had any
yeah.
contact with him and his work?
No. I'd love to. I'll first thing after we conclude here, I'll take a look. That's really interesting.
Yeah, he's been doing research for decades now and has been acknowledged for his research on epigenetics. He coined the term, and recognizing that we are not our DNA.
Right.
And our mindset, our beliefs can change what's happening in our physical body.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of that, and this is something I've noticed in talking with people in the AI sphere, is that there's still this, idea, probably left over from Descartes, et cetera, that you are your mind, and that your mind resides in your brain, and discounting all the computational processes that occur below the neck. Like the body is not a passive input-output layer. There's learning, there's habituation, there's memory, there's a million different things it does, and it is part of cognition. So the idea that we could just take the brain and put the brain in a vat and that would be you is insane. When you really look at and a big output of that, I'm sure Bruce would agree, is that a lot of this idea of like a lot of the mystery around how a belief could change how your body functions comes from this misconception of seeing them as these like separate things that operate on different planes. And it's like, no, it's an integrated system. So why wouldn't a deeply held belief impact the way the body functions? The body and brain are the self is body and brain, and they're both centers of computation that interact with each other. There's a really good paper by Gil Carvalho and Antonio Damasio that I'll link here, that details the interoceptive nervous system, which is like this whole other complex computing nervous system, an older one, that sits in the body and around the organs and in the blood, et cetera, and reports on everything, but also is modulating everything all the time. Yeah, let's see. I'll send that in a second. But yeah, that would be my response.
Yeah, thank you. Of
course.
That's all, Leo? There's nothing else you're interested in?
Nothing else. Yeah. Absolutely nothing else.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Outside of the photography and the music and all the other things.
Sleep. Yes.
Well, we wanted to spend some time talking about the E4 project, but before we did, I really am, relative to what you were just speaking to, I did want to ask Nanette about any of experiences that she's had with any of the subjects in terms of running the lab on a day-to-day basis. If there's been anything, out of the ordinary, so to speak, or any cadence mismatch between what subjects were expected to do and what ultimately happened, and any stories. And if not, we can go back to something a little more lighthearted and talk to Leo about the E4 project.
Yeah, let me think. So in general, I do believe a lot of people sign up to be participants without really knowing what the research process is like, and how it's like standardized for everyone. So I'll have people come in all the time with their own like requests that have nothing like that I can't just change the protocol to kind of accommodate them, so they don't understand that. They'll be like, so that's common, where I have to kind of explain, like I have to stick to kind of the same agenda for each person, or else I'd have to like essentially throw out your data because you're different, things like that. And then I'll have, as I mentioned, the EEG setup taking like 30 minutes. I'll have people sit on my chair and like treat me as like a hairstylist. So they'll just like drop gossip and secrets and information about their life that like they just met me, but because I don't know. So I hear a lot of interesting stories from all these people. But one of the most interesting participants we've had, it's for our meditation study, was these two individuals. They were a couple, like they were partners, and they were incredibly codependent. So they wanted to essentially participate in the study at the same time, and in fact they wanted to like meditate, like touching as well, like at least like one part of their body. So that was an interesting experience, and it would be cool to have like a follow-up study where we've talked about it, inspired by them, to have like individuals like group meditation and running studies like that, or just mirroring individuals and running meditation studies like that. But yeah, it was strange to have, like, they didn't want to separate from each other. So that was an interesting conversation to navigate between them. But yeah, no day is the same. Everyone coming in completely different. And yeah.
What are people's motivations primarily? And then we can wrap this up and, like I said, move over to the E4. But
yeah,
what are the motivations? Is it because I know that some of the subjects are paid, I believe, and then some aren't. And
yeah.
so I'm kind of curious
all
about
our
that.
studies are paid. We pay $30 per hour. And so we have, like, I would separate them into two groups. We have individuals who have heard about our lab from like other podcasts, or on Instagram, or just through different articles and that they're interested in. So it's people who again are interested in like the topics that we're studying and sought us out and signed up. And then we have just the regular individuals who generally sign up for research studies because it's like they get paid for it, which it is different from, like, we have some students come in from UCLA. We're really close to UCLA, where they wouldn't get paid there normally. If they did studies, they would get like extra credit for their classes. So they kind of trek here and make a couple of dollars just by taking surveys and going through a cool experience. So those are like the two different groups. And then again, the meditators that we seek out, we've tried to recruit from different meditation centers, or retreats happening. We'll try to contact kind of the organizations there. And then word of mouth has been the best. A lot of meditators have their own groups they sit in, so they kind of share word about our study with their friends and their community, and that's kind of how people join those studies.
Cool. Well, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Just always curious about that because I visited the lab several times and I anecdotally have heard some funny stories while I've been there. So thank you for sharing. Well, for the remainder of the time, I'd really like to start the process, which we'll continue to follow for the rest of the week on the show, which is to deep dive into some of the various research activities that are going on. Leo, you definitely spoke to the chills work, the trust work, a number of things that we will be revisiting with the additional scientists who are doing the appropriate scientists who are working on those projects as well. But for today, since you are the lead for the E4 project, I thought we could take some time and have you tell us about that a bit and unpack that for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to you if you want to just give us a sense of what is the E4 project? What are you trying to achieve, and how's it working, and how's it going to look?
So I mentioned that the broad mission of the lab, right, is to democratize non-ordinary states and figure out sort of the useful states of consciousness and how to understand them better. Um, a specific sub-project within that is essentially, given all the legal and cultural, et cetera, contraindications around psychedelic experience, and given that we're still evolving in our understanding of how psychedelic experiences produce, um, such other-oriented changes in behavior that are very robust. We figured an interesting way to do that would be to see if we could non-pharmacologically create psychedelic experiences using the current sort of cutting edge models of how and why they work, right? If you can apply the current best thinking as to why psychedelics work to create something that mimics those same properties without the psychedelic itself and show that it causes the same brain states, the same outcomes, that's a good test of the theories. And it also means that you can extend these experiences to people for whom, again, actually ingesting a chemical or a plant, et cetera, may be personally undesirable for them. It may be, they may have cultural or religious prohibitions against it. It may be illegal where they live. That's kind of I think that's the main source of inequality of access, is that, like, yes, we can be in LA and, probably obtain, legal or semi-legal or uncontrolled psilocybin that's been tested and put into a nice chocolate and everything, or we can go to a ketamine clinic, et cetera. But, like, most of the people in the world don't have access to anything like a psychedelic that isn't possibly, of unknown origin, of unknown purity, et cetera. It's just not, we've been through this, whole massive era of this really puritanical, prohibition on these transformative substances, and we're still coming out of it. But so in the meantime, we would like to see if we can better understand how they work and make them more accessible by trying to produce them without any drug entering the body at all, right? So hence comes the E4 project, which stands for Emulating Entheogens to Enhance Empathy, right? Because psychedelics can do many things. Something that we think is positive from a social perspective, and generally pretty uncontroversial, is that they tend to make people more empathetic, more compassionate. And so we want to use that as our main outcome measure, right? Because I don't think most people object to wanting to feel more kindness and empathy for others. And there's a pretty good social argument for it, right? As opposed to trying to inculcate some, like, belief, right? We're not about that. The whole idea is that we want to create a setting in which someone can arrive at their own conclusions on their own terms without it being loaded with any ideology or any, credo whatsoever. That's up to you. You find your own way to the meaning. So the main components that we think are crucial to transformative psychedelic experiences, and then I'll get into how we want to reproduce them, are first, sort of mind-body coherence, right? Connection between the conscious mind and the body's interoceptive processes. So this is actually why we've been studying aesthetic chills, is that we want to end up with an experience that mimics psychedelics. And part of that experience is we want people to quickly be brought in touch between their narrative, cognitive parts of their brain or of their self and their body and their bodily processes. So the way we'll be doing that, so the E4 experience itself is going to consist of a guided, empathy-inducing meditation, loving kindness meditation, which is this very pleasant exercise where you expand the circle of self to include others, eventually including, all the beings in the universe, even people you hate, even things, everything, all encompassing compassion. And to aid people in doing that, first piece of it is we want to bring the body into play, both by having a haptic interface. Basically, that means an interface that interacts with your body. So we'll either be using sort of a vibrating array that we create ourselves, or we'll be using a device called the Tesla suit. We're still working on different options for that. So we'll guide people through something like a Vipassana, like have them scan and bring their attention compassionately to each part of their body. And then as the meditations are proceeding, they're going to be underlined by a soundtrack that will be precisely tailored to increase the likelihood of chills at different points. So that allows us to join the content that people are they're hearing and enacting in like a verbal way with their body process. It brings the body into it, right? So we bring the body and mind into coherence with each other, or aid people in doing that. And then another really important component is trying to aid in either expanding the boundaries of self or dissolving the boundaries of self, however you want to think about it. And that's where we bring in the neurofeedback component that we talked about before. So they'll be doing this loving kindness meditation with the chills and the haptic bodily stimulation in this mirror cube that creates a boundless space. It really looks like you're in an eternal field of stars. I think you've experienced it, Carson. And inside that space, even though it's giant and boundless, the lights and sound within it, or the lights particularly, are going to be tied to our recordings of the person's heart rate and their respiration, etc. So as they breathe, this whole field of stars will breathe with them. And as their heart rate changes and modulates and their heart rate variability changes, they'll also see that reflected in the colors and the sort of the different sort of undulations of this giant star field. So they'll perceive themselves to be both a being in a giant, enormous space, sort of that's very awe-inspiring, but they're nonetheless tied to that space and linked to it, which we think will perceptually enforce and encourage this expanded sense of self, or a dissolving of the self boundaries. And that, coupled with this guided loving kindness meditation that not just encourages you to expand yourself, but to also feel your connection to each other person, to every other being in that expanded space, right? So transcending the self, but also increasing the feeling of connection with others, as well as the connection with the body. We think that all those combined with this sort of guided kindness meditation will create something close to a self-transcendent psychedelic-like experience. Even, I mean, and I can speak to, it's so hard to explain that without demonstrating it. So I encourage people to come to the lab and try it out. But even the little pieces, the early prototypes of this can be quite transformative and quite touching. Like the mirror cube, most people who I know who have brought in there come out going like, God, if I could do that once a week, I wouldn't need therapy. Like or talking about how they cried inside there.
Mhm.
The only people I know who haven't are people who are, such experienced psychedelic users that they're like, okay, that's very nice, but I've been further. And it's like, great, good for you, right? But for most people, especially for the curious but who haven't tried it, it can be pretty transformative. And that's just our first prototype. That's just the mirror cube sort of undulating with a nice like guided talk designed by Duncan Trussell about the pale blue dot and our place in the world. So, we anticipate 3 years down the line, when all these different pieces have been tested individually and then combined into one encompassing experience, I think we will, basically be able to deliver something like a psychedelic trip, but one that you can, get up and stop if you're, one that you can press the red abort button if you need to. Someone can come in and check on you, and it's all knowing that you're in a sort of like safe, like scientific environment where you can stop at any moment and nothing's actually going inside your brain, etc. And it's perfectly legal, and hopefully something that we can make more and more accessible as these mind gyms become more common, and as we find other forms of it that can be scaled more easily, either to your personal device or to personal VR, or even, I think once people can experience the full E4 experience, can reenact or get to that space more easily on their own using home neurofeedback or something more simple. I think a big part of the intention of all of this is a part of why someone might not be motivated to to go to these places via psychedelics or via meditation is because they don't know what they're aiming for. So if you can give someone just a little taste of what this kind of self-transcendent state can be like, I think that can also help motivate people to undergo their own practice or undergo their own experiences to get there. That's part of the democratizing. It's not just, we're not trying to replace things. It's more giving more people an opportunity to see what these altered states can be like and why they're so beautiful and why they're so human too. They're not just some hippie nonsense or some newfangled thing. They're one of the oldest things that humans have done. They're a central part of human culture and meaning making. So I think the more we can spread that through the language of science, which is what, a lot of people in the modern skeptical age take as their source of truth, I think that would be good, because I think science is often served to distance people from these more human aspects of experience. Right.
Yeah, really well said. For the people that have experienced this in terms of the initial participants,
Yeah.
can you characterize again motivations? Understood that a fair number of the folks that are showing up, maybe they've been psychonauts, they've had some experience already, of course, with psychedelics, and they're curious to know kind of what are these folks doing at IACS to replicate that, and what's this cube about? Let me check it out. And obviously, there's some, I would imagine, I would guess, some large percentage of people that would fit into that motivational mold. And curious to know about others that you might experience in terms of people who've shown up, people who haven't had psychedelic experiences, but are curious and what their aims are as well.
I mean, I've mostly seen people's long form text responses from the online surveys, and some people report just feeling completely transformed, or how it reminded them of being at church, or
I see.
only people are reminded of what it was like to be a child, or of
Mhm.
really powerful moments in their life, like they're reminded of loved ones frequently. There's this
Mhm.
sense of reconnection to people close to them. Um, but in terms of the responses from people who've come to the actually to the lab, I think Nanette can speak to that with much more grain.
Nanette, do you have a sense of that in terms of people who've experienced the cube, in terms of what brings them there, and any anecdotal experience that you can share?
Well, we're not for the cube. A lot of what Leo mentioned, we're planning to run. We haven't run yet.
Sure.
Right now, we're actively running our aesthetic chill study, where we have people come in and listen to 3 5-minute audios that we've based on the prior research kind of selected to have like the highest probability of eliciting chills. And so just reviewing those like survey responses, because after they listen to the music, they answer some questions on, if they experienced chills, if this reminded them of a personal experience. And I've had actually several people cry after listening to the songs. And as Leo mentioned, I've had several people actually reference previous like experiences they had. So I had one person talk about how it reminded them of like the time they took ayahuasca, or reminded them of another moment in their life where it was kind of a transcendental experience. And then there's also individuals who are very musical as well, like Leo. And so they had a lot to say about the music as opposed to like their personal experience listening to the tracks. And then I also had people who come in, like listen to the songs and felt absolutely nothing. So we get a wide range of people, which is like the point of these studies.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I do agree, individuals who are more spiritual maybe, or like artistic, or kind of in that realm, enjoy the cube much more than maybe like analytical kind of black and white people, I would say. But yeah, we ran one specific study comparing the cube with just a VR, and they're both pretty novel experiences for individuals, I found. So they both had like effects, but the cube was more popular.
Yeah. Interesting. And I know, Leo, too, just in our discussions, and I'm hoping you can help me unpack this. I what I remember, there is a real intention as part of the cube work is for participants to be able to go away with kind of their own cocktail, so to speak. These are my words, not necessarily yours. To be able to replicate these experiences, not necessarily even within the cube, but in maybe some other future state with some other future tech, like you were speaking to with their own devices, et cetera. So I'm curious if you could unpack maybe your vision there, and also as it relates to a phrase that I haven't heard before, which is this notion of a mind gym. So could you speak to that as well?
Well, the mind gym refers to the Lumina Cube, and it's just the idea that you can use an immersive audiovisual environment to improve concentration, resilience to stress, etc. So it's a gym for your mind, right? By having these very intense immersive audiovisual experiences that are not normally, accessible in sober daily consciousness, right? And that are keyed to you and to your physiology, right? Like, yes, movie theaters obviously are very immersive, transformative experiences, or can be, but it's a shared thing. It's not like it's geared to your heart rate and to your brain, etc. And speaking of that, in terms of extending these processes for home use, one of the technologies that Nico has pioneered that I'm sure he can speak on in much more detail, but are basically advanced neurofeedback techniques that can allow you to, essentially close the distance between where your a multidimensional sort of like a point in multidimensional space of like where your brain is now according to all these multitude of features and where you're trying to get to. And the idea is that if we can, in this more immersive in-lab environment, get you to a place where you not only report that like you experience all these different aspects of self-transcendence, you had a transformative experience, you liked where your brain went. And then the idea is that we can save that state or save properties or features of that state. And then either in the lab or at home, we can set you up with a much more simple kind of neurofeedback apparatus, maybe just like a circle that you're looking at on a screen or something much more sparse, where the algorithm is geared to just close the distance between where you are and that safe state that you got from at the lab or that you experienced prior. And that's a technology that we generally want to increasingly make available, is allow people to, save these rarefied states they really enjoy and then be able to get back to them more easily. Right.
Yeah.
Help people. People still need to have agency and still need to take part in their own practice, but it's easier to get back up to the mountain if you have a rope getting you back there, etc.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to be mindful of our time here for a bit. Tom, is there anything that you want to speak to at all or probe? And you're on mute.
For me, listening into the conversation, part of what I'm hearing in the discussion today, and it goes back to the conversation earlier, is where the groundbreaking work that you're doing is trying to unwind a scientific paradigm of the brain and the mind are one. That the work you're also doing is helping us return to our state as human beings, that we are hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. This misappropriation of Darwin's work that we can't help ourselves, where it's a survival of the fittest, and yet we know that that's just not humanity. There's no reported cases of a human having PTSD from love, unlike in a conflict situation. Wow. And then the other piece is just connecting the body back to and the human being back to nature and to our way of being in the world. So I love the groundbreaking work that you're doing. That's essentially returning us to where we were, a couple hundred years ago as humans on the planet, and providing that using technology to reintroduce ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah, fully agree.
I think that's really well said. And I would also add too, for me, I really like the notion of the democratizing of the states. creating that access for everyone. Hadn't really thought about it in that frame. I mean, I have in the past, but thinking about it in terms of access, traditional, for lack of a better term, traditional access to clean psychedelics or other sorts of tools that people can optionally use to go to some of these states is, of course, not available to many, many, many people. And also there's a lot of trepidation too in terms of ingesting something like that without any guidance or access to anybody who might have a previous knowing that they could share. So I love this democratizing of it has taken on new meaning for me today in a way that I haven't really thought about. I think it's brilliant. Any timeline sense of, mentioned a couple years, and I know this is obviously a huge swing in the scientific sense of the word. So do you have a sense of when something like this might be available, to the general public in terms of being able to go into a Lumina Cube and having these experiences?
I mean, that depends on a number of other factors that come with trying to scale up or bring something to market or to publicly available resources. But at least at least having the complete experience sort of tested and reported on, which, everything we do is open science. Everything we do is, published open science. We share as much of our tools and pipelines and data as we possibly can. And so I foresee at least the E4 experience in its full form as something that can be possibly replicated elsewhere, which is the first step to taking something to market or making something publicly available. I'd say, probably in the next 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you know of any other labs or any other entities that are doing any sort of similar work?
I have always been bad with names, so I unfortunately can't give a good list, but that's maybe something we can follow up with. But there are definitely other entities, actually, many of them in Santa Monica. I know, like, the Reality Center is one that comes to mind. God, there's another one I cannot remember the name for the life of me, but there are a couple places that essentially are, pursuing the same notion of, like, trying to replicate psychedelic states without psychedelics. And I've experienced some of the approaches, and I think a lot of them it's very impressive. And I think for the most part, the people that we know of, we're very much in the position of we're very much of the mind of, like, let's share notes and, learn from each other and see how we can advance this generally. I would say that ours is possibly the one that's most integrated with, like, open academic style research. Because some other approaches are they're for-profit entities, and so there's a little more opaque as to, like, how they're gathering their data and getting the research, etc., which is not not intended as a critique of them. Like, we do things our own way and other people do things a different way. Yeah, so it's definitely we're not the only people doing it, for sure.
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of work, and hopefully as more of this work comes out, we can learn from each other's mistakes and try to make this something that is widespread, because we shouldn't be the only people doing it.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that others are doing it in their own way, again, for profit or not, at least the wheels are turning, because I think this is incredibly important work and can be transformative at scale ultimately, and really bring a lot of great benefit. Well, I, again, wanted to just keep an eye on the time. We wanted to create some time space, because I know, Leo, you have some things that you have to do, but you might be able to jump on the after chat Zoom call as Nanette, if you are also able to, that'd be wonderful. Any last things that Nanette that you'd like to add, or Leo? I'll start with Nanette, and if not, that's fine.
Nothing particularly to add. Thank you for inviting me, Carson.
Yeah, of course.
Glad to join the team. And then, yeah, hopefully, I'm here for a couple more studies, see things reach their end before I go to grad school.
Cool. Leo, any last minute thoughts?
Uh, no, I think that's about it. It was really great to thank you for having us on, and we look forward to discussing more of the projects as the week progresses.
Right.
This is just episode 1. So
Yeah, exactly. This is just the basis. One of the things too that I would like to add, and then I'm going to throw it over to Tom if you like, is as we will discuss in greater depth on Friday, the independent scientific research in general, and in my personal opinion, specifically around the frontiers of consciousness studies and expansion, is really of paramount importance to the benefit of our global human society. It's really critical. And I think Leo in particular had some very eloquent words to talk about kind of coming out of oh gosh, what was the frame you used? We're emerging slowly from a very traditionalist view of psychedelic experiences. I've forgotten the word that you just used, but I think it's important to note. Say that again?
I don't know, puritanical.
Puritanical, that was the word I was looking for. And I think that as we're able to move forward from a more traditional orientation to something new, something a little more progressive, and understanding the benefits of that, that it's critically important that independent science is able to do its thing. So IACS has been very, very bold in striking down out on this course of study just broadly as an independent neuroscience lab that is a 501c3. This is not an easy path to take, but it's critically important. And I can attest as firsthand experience, just hanging out with the scientists at lunch and just the conversations that they have and the interests that where their minds take them and the dialogue and so forth. It's truly brilliant. And it really does need to be supported. So this is my blatant pitch on behalf of the lab to ask the listeners to support this work financially. If that's something that you would like to do, you can go to their website at advancedconsciousness.org and make a tax-free donation. Ultimately, we will be creating a subscriber basis for community members to support their work, and there will be some additional benefits and fun things that'll come as a result of that. But in the short term, being able to support this lab and its work outside of the traditional funding mechanisms that are typically found in the academic environments and or large grant giving structures is very important. They need just general latitude to be able to pursue what it is that they want to pursue from a scientific perspective. And a lot of the traditional frames, for better and for worse, create some constraints around that freedom. So moving to a community-based science supported organization is something that's important. So I'll get off my little soapbox about that now, but I would encourage everyone, if you're able to do something to support the work financially. It's very important. So tomorrow, we are going to be joined again by Dr. Leonardo Christoph Moore, aka Leo, and he will talk about the work of trust, and then also another one of his colleagues, Dr. Adam Safran, who will be also talking about what Leo was speaking to earlier about empathetic AI. That's my frame of, I'm not sure how he would describe that, but or both of them, but making AI essentially not want to kill us at some level and be beneficial. So looking forward to that. Again, we have the after chat link, I believe, is in the Zoom world somewhere. Stan put it there in the chat. So you can come and hang out with us. And again, thank you for your time, Nanette, for coming on and sharing your experience. And Leo, thank you again for your time. And Tom, I'll throw it back to you if you have any last minute things that you'd like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Carson. Thank you for organizing the week and for inviting Leo and Nanette to be with us today and their colleagues throughout the week. One of the areas we didn't talk about today was we've spent a lot of time talking about the work that you're doing and the brain as a piece of anatomy and the body and the connection of the brain and the mind. And we didn't get into psychology at all and human psychology. And I look at someone like Dr. Terence Real and the work he's done, where he talks about the not from an anatomical perspective of the brain, but he talks about the wounded child part of our brain and the adaptive child part of our brain and the wise elder. and that correlates with the amygdala, the mammalian brain, and the prefrontal cortex. But the work that you're doing, from my perspective, is adding to the toolkit of how do we move people through that, from being functioning as a wounded child, or that adaptive child that's driving so much of human behavior, to help us get to the wise elder. And there are lots of things out there. Certainly the work in talk therapy, traditional psychology, medications, et cetera. But the groundbreaking research you're doing is helping humanity move from that wounded child to that wise elder. And it's beautiful work. Hopefully we can explore that some more this week.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. And also thank you, Jim, Garrison, one more time for being able to convene this podcast and give the opportunity to spread all this genius into the world. So with that, we'll go ahead and sign off and jump over to the after chat. And thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.